Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Carla Feeney. I'm an academic programs manager at Microsoft. Thank you for coming. It's an honor and a pleasure to introduce Jane Margolis. Dr. Margolis is a social scientist at the UCLA Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. Her work focuses on the gender and race gaps in technology studies and careers. Through the lens of computer science education, Dr. Margolis studies how our schools reproduce inequalities and suggests innovative solutions for building effective institutional responses. She's the principal investigator of an NSF research project, Into the Loop, a university K-12 alliance to increase and enhance the computer science learning opportunities for African American, Latino, Latina, and female students in the second largest school district in the country, which happens to be Los Angeles. Dr. Margolis is the co-author of two books, the award-winning Unlocking the Clubhouse, Women in Computing, published by MIT Press in 2002. And I might add, if you haven't read it, it's fantastic, and it's a seminal work. And her most recent publication, Stuck in the Shallow End, Education, Race, and Computing. This was published by MIT Press and came out in August of 2008. Dr. Margolis' books have received both national and local media coverage. And I have to add on a personal note, Microsoft is very proud to support Dr. Margolis' work. In my role as a K-12 academic programs manager, we supported the research that, not the sole supporter, but one of the supporters of her research that led to the publication of Stuck in the Shallow End. And we're also a current contributor to her research project on building a high school computer science curriculum that's inclusive and engaging. So please join me in welcoming Jane.
So thank you very much for coming. Today I'm going to be talking about the research that's behind the book Stuck in the Shallow End. It began quite a few years ago. From 94 to 99, I was at Carnegie Mellon University looking at why so few women are studying computer science. And when I was at CMU looking at gender, I was really struck and distressed by the few students of color that were at the higher education level. And it actually, what was there back in 1994, it was true not only for CMU, it was true nationwide, and the statistics remain. So at PhD granting universities, undergraduates, African Americans and Latinos combined, it's about 8% of the undergraduates. At the PhD level, it's 2.4%. So the numbers were very distressing, and I wanted to understand more about the pipeline that was going up into college and what was happening at the high school level. So when I moved, I happened at the end of the CMU study and at the end of writing Unlocking the Clubhouse, moved to Los Angeles and got an NSF grant award for a longitudinal study to look at in LA high schools why so few African Americans and Latinos and females were learning computer science at the high school level. So this was our research question, and we studied this in 3 different schools in Los Angeles. The schools were all digital high schools, digital high school being a program to fund schools to get computers and the internet into the schools. The schools were different from each other, but typical enough of the district. The district is a large urban district. What I'm going to talk about is particular to Los Angeles, but it remains true for the New York schools, the Washington, D.C. schools, and I'm sure some of it will ring true for your Seattle schools. The district is 75% Latino. There's 200,000 high school kids, 57 high schools. It's 11% African American, 8% white, and 3% Asian. So it's a largely Latino district. 69% of the kids are on free and reduced lunch in this district. So the three schools that we looked at, one was a overcrowded Latino school, year-round school, 5,000 kids. The other one was a middle-class, working-class African American school that was a math science aerospace magnet. And the third was in a white wealthy district where 1/3 of the kids were from the white wealthy area and 2/3 of the kids were kids that traveled to that school, kids of color from over 101 different zip codes from around the city. So there were 3 different schools, all of them very active in digital high school situations. And our research was based on interviews with students. We interviewed almost 200 students. Interviews with counselors, principals, teachers inside of these 3 high schools, and observations. And we did this for 3 to 4 years. So there are certain things that we found true across all schools. One of them was, what is computer science anyway? And within the school district, there was real confusion about what is computer science versus what is computer literacy. And we make a big distinction. So computer literacy is critically important for kids to know how to use the tools, how to go to the library and use the tools, how to do word processing, file sharing, all of that. Critically important. But we were wanting to know who was getting, as we call in higher education, the high level, the high order, the high status knowledge, which is, as Jeanette Wing of National Science Foundation has coined the term, computational thinking. We wanted to know who was learning the problem solving, the logic thinking, the foundational problem solving, critical thinking that is at the heart of computer science, and who was being introduced to it at the schools and who was not. Which students were learning what about computer science. So we made a distinction between literacy and computer science. And what we also discovered across schools was that there is a real myth about technology as a great equalizer. A lot of districts were feeling that put in the computers, put in the internet, and this was going to equalize, across different ethnic groups, different socioeconomic groups. And great hopes have been put on getting the technology into the school. So I'm sure you're familiar with this Microsoft ad. I'll zero in on this. It says, "We see a future chairman of the board. Computer literacy helps lead to greater success in school and, more importantly, greater success in life. That's what led us to partner with Boys and Girls Clubs of America to start Club Tech. As a result, 3.3 million young people have the chance to learn to use today's technology because we believe that given the right tools, kids can do just about anything. Microsoft, potential, your potential, our passion." Well, this computer literacy is critically important. But given the right tools, kids can do almost anything. Well, if you look at the state of this school, by the way, this is all cut and paste. You can see the Scotch tape. It looks kind of worn and torn. That's because I've had this ad on my door in my office for about 4 years now, and I keep ripping it off and taking it around with me to different talks that I did. And finally I said, I should just put it up on use my tools, right? Put it up on the computer. Anyway, that's why it's looking so worn and torn. But if you look at this school, it's kind of a worn and torn school. The girl is Latina. And, given her the right tools, is she going to be able to do about anything? And that's kind of sort of a question that was running through our research. So I think that there has been a real myth, and actually this myth about technology being the great equalizer is true not just for computers. It goes back to the handheld calculator. Everyone thought that was going to bridge the achievement gap in math. Cable TV, people thought this was going to really solve it, and now it's sort of the computers and the internet. And don't get me wrong, They've got to be there. They've got to be in the schools. Kids need to learn them. Computer literacy programs are critical. But we were looking beyond that, and who was learning the problem solving and the critical thinking of computer science. So instead of equity, when we did our research, what we found was incredible disparities, and that the disparities fall along race and socioeconomic lines, and that when you look at computer science, not only does it reveal what's happening in computer science education, but it's a real indicator. It's emblematic of how inequality is being produced in our educational system. And it indicates all these different factors that are weighing upon the schools to work against the achievement gap, and that are not helping the achievement gap and are working against equity. So I want to step us away from any slides or anything. I'm not going to show them for a while, and give you a narrative picture somewhat of the three different schools and what we found. The first school was East River, which was the overcrowded Latino school, year-round school of 5,000 kids. And this was a school that was filled with technology. I mean, we said it just glowed with technology. The teachers there were passionate. They had written grant after grant, and they had tons of equipment stacked up into this school. But when we started looking at what the courses were, it was very meager. So we identify this school as a school that's technology rich but curriculum poor. So there was no AP computer science. There was a programming class that was only there because a math teacher started getting interested in programming and sort of decided that he was going to do it, and he learned it on his own, and he had no professional development, no training. He was sort of learning while he was teaching it, and it was only one class of 20 kids when there were 3 tracks of kids going year-round in this school. 5,000 kids, and only 20 were able to take this programming class. And it was really kind of done by the book. There was no innovative curriculum going on. He was just trying to patch it all together. And then there was an internet publishing class, which was really cut and paste, follow directions, nothing beyond that situation. And the teachers were kind of isolated. They have no community of learners between themselves, no professional development. So they were sort of doing the best that they could. And as we said, as I said, the very large school, the counseling was 500 kids for one counselor. And the counselors, their sort of main task was just to make sure that the schedule was filled, and that's what their task was. And they had really no understanding of what computer science was. Additionally, computer science in the schools, as you probably know, is not part of the academic canon. You know, it sits off to the side. It's considered a technical course, a vocational course. And so it gets sort of low prioritized. And what happens is several things. One is kids get, as they call it, they get dumped into the computer classes, you know, as you would get dumped into any sort of a filler. Or you can't get into the computer class if you're interested in it. So it works both ways. So what we found in the school was that it was a shrinking curriculum. The programming class was there for just a year and a half, got cut. No AP computer science. And the irony of this is at a time when the government is saying we need more math and science and engineering expertise in this country, you look at this huge school and everything's getting cut. Now, one of the most important points of our research was that interest was there. We interviewed kids that were in the technology classes, and we interviewed kids that, you're like, I know, it's hard to hear. We interviewed kids in the technology class, and we interviewed kids in the high math classes, and there was no place for them to go learn this stuff. What we got told is, well, they can go to the local community college, but you know, it should be at the schools, you know, and it should be part of their college pathway, and they should be getting the preparation that other kids are getting. So one girl, Susanna, that we interviewed in a pre-calculus class who saw herself as a techie kid, was involved in programming and wanted to do more of programming. And so we interviewed her, and this is what happened in the interview. Interviewer, how did you get in the floristry class? She was assigned to floristry. Susanna, because it's a technical arts. You need a tech class in order to graduate. And the computer class was full, and there was no room for me. This was the programming class. Interviewer, if you had a choice between floristry and another semester of programming, what would you choose? Susanna, programming. I'm not really a girl, so the flower thing is not really for me. Interviewer, did the counselor put you into the floristry class? Susanna, yeah, because it was either that or I would have to have taken service again. Service is a class where you're given credit. It fills your schedule. You do hall errands for the dean's office and the principal's office. That's service, and they assign kids service. So here's a girl who wanted to be learning programming, was in a pre-calculus class, and was either in service or in floristry. It was heartbreaking to hear what was going on in these schools. Now, the other school, the predominantly African American school, was a math, science, aerospace magnet. And when we interviewed the kids there, first of all, the curriculum was pretty much the same. There was AP for 1 year. It was taught by a geometry teacher who didn't have background in computer science and was struggling away. Only 5 kids enrolled. The scores were low, and so the principal decided to no longer teach the course. There's a whole debate. I mean, our position is, I want scores to be high, of course, but I don't really care what the scores are at this point. It's just kids should be able to have access to this knowledge. So the course was canceled. There was no programming, and the internet publishing class was taught by an uncertified history teacher who, on his own, taught this because he felt that these kids in this school should have access to this kind of curriculum. Anyway, 30% of the kids that we interviewed in this school self-identified as techie kids who wanted to do stuff with technology, who wanted to do stuff with programming. We interviewed a kid who was really into computer animation, cartooning. So let me just describe some of these kids. Pablo, a Latino student, had come to Westward for the aerospace magnet and was disappointed that there were actually no classes having to do with aerospace at the school. With a father who was a teacher and a former pilot, Pablo described himself as a self-taught computer whiz and was interested in computing as it relates to airplane design. Greg, an African American student, told us about his uncle who works with hardware and programming and helped Greg get the parts to try building his own computer. Brian, also African American, spoke of designing medical equipment. Another student, Brad, talked about using computers to compose music. In a mathematical analysis class, we interviewed Brandon, who described his passion as playing guitar, weightlifting, and learning calculus, particularly not just the calculus itself, but how calculus can be used in engineering, and goes on and on and on. Of these kids who came and wanted to do stuff but had no opportunities to learn, what was heartbreaking was they felt they were getting prepared by this sort of low-level internet publishing classes and had no idea what was needed to make it in college or to pursue this pathways. The principal, when we talked to her about, what is your computer science program in your school, said, I just want kids when they leave here to be functional, because part of analyzing a situation is getting the data you need. Data is now on the internet. Is it a valid source? Is it current? Is somebody trying to sell me something? So I think they need that awareness too. We agree. Kids need this, but that is a very low floor to just be functional when you have kids that were thirsty for something else and for thirsty to actually pursue a higher level knowledge. Okay, that was the second school. Third school, the city on the hill, sat overlooking the Pacific Ocean, surrounded by mansions. The school where 1/3 of the kids come from the area, 2/3 come from all over the city. And lo and behold, of course, very full curriculum. AP Computer Science taught by a teacher who had been in the industry as a programmer herself. After AP Computer Science, there was a programming course. There was Multimedia Academy that Hollywood had, sent people to. There was the programming course, and there was the Introduction to Computers course. But what we found there is that as you go up the hierarchy of the courses, they get wider and wider and wider and wider. And actually, this was a school that we call it 2 schools in 1. While it is touted as being an integrated school, it was not integrated at all. And what we found in the AP Computer Science class is it was really a class that was servicing the kids that were getting the computing at home. And had all of the equipment, had all of the resources, and it was their territory. And you know how in high school different classes get the reputations of belonging to different kids? Well, that's what AP Computer Science, and it was completely insular. And without teachers or counselors that were taking a proactive role, that really believed that there were kids of color in the school that could do these courses, without active intervention, that class was going to remain insular. And when we talked to the kids of color in the school, they would talk about how when counselors come and talk to them, they talk about junior college. When they go talk to the white kids, they talk about going to UCLA. That all the way through the school, we're picking up the signals that they did not belong in these higher track classes. And the higher track classes were only 10% kids of color, even though 2/3 of the student body were kids of color. So it got to be a very segregated school, even though it was a so-called integrated school. And I just saw this picture in the New York Times today. I don't know. What we called the kids that were in AP Computer Science was preparatory privilege. They had all this privilege. This is a picture for the New York Times. It says Paul Fiorello, owner of a California electronics store, helping his sons Kobe 10 left and Ian 8 build a Titan tank robot. And this was an article about 2 days ago about robotics kids, Lego Mindstorms, and everything. And I just saw this picture. While it is wonderful, first of all, it made me feel horribly guilty that I didn't do this with my daughter. I mean, I can't tell you what this picture brings up for me. Why didn't I get robot kids? Why were we not sitting with her? What did we do wrong? But it also captures the stories when we interviewed the kids in AP Computer Science, what their lives were like. It was this, and they described it. And it was just not one computer, it was multiple computers. Software, they social network with kids in their neighborhood, they learn from each other, they have all the equipment that they want, and then they're in AP Computer Science class, and that's the only kids in it, and it's very insular, completely insular. So here we have these 3 schools, and in the schools with a high concentration of kids of color, there's basically no access to computer science learning. It is denied access. It is not there. And a lot of it is because of the testing frenzy that's going on in the schools now. If computer science is not part of the academic curriculum and it's not going to be tested by NCLB, then principals feel that they cannot do it, they cannot afford to teach it. So what's happening is the curriculum's getting dumbed down, it's getting narrower, these rich, wonderful electives are no longer in the schools, and it's kids of color who are really bearing the brunt of this. Ironically, it was NCLB that was designed to address the achievement gap. So there's denied access in the schools, but there's something else operates, which is belief systems. And they're beliefs that when we interviewed teachers and counselors and principals, that they very much, when we would ask them, who do you think would make a good computer science student, they would use words like, a self-starter, good in math, which I think is true, good in math and science, a self-starter, and they would use phrases that they're just born to do it, that there's just a natural talent. It's an innate talent. And they would describe these kids. They'd say, like this kid, and they would describe these kids, right? That you just can't get them away from the computer. And it's just innate in them, and it's a natural drive. And so really attributing being in computer science to this innate talent. And then their images would really be your heritage here. This is the image that they carry in their mind of who is going to be good in computer science. But the tragedy of all this is that when we would interview them about their own kids and how they would describe their own kids in their school, and I'm talking about the schools with a high concentration of kids of color, they would use words like unmotivated, not interested, lazy, not into this stuff. And so in one of the schools, the Latino school, as teachers said, there are some students that just because of their background, they don't know how to problem solve. They're at a total loss. They don't have that curiosity because they've been spoon-fed by their moms and dads all their whole lives. So they don't have that ability or desire to figure things out or explore. And it was they've been getting in cut and paste kind of education their whole lives. Point and click educations, no problem solving, no critical thinking. And then the school is sort of blaming them for, a lack of curiosity. And so it's this vicious, in all cases of segregation, there are belief systems that rationalize the segregation and justify the segregation. And we found that belief systems that a lot of these kids in the schools are not up to it were what were rationalizing not having the high level curriculum. And it was a tension. I mean, there were educators that were passionate about getting equal education, that were talking about the pressures of NCLB, who were talking about not having the funding in the school, who wanted more curriculum, who wanted to get it in there. But they couldn't because they didn't have the funding. They didn't have the teachers. They didn't have training for the teachers. That is a really critical thing, not having the training for the teachers. And so those were the major factors, but there were also belief systems that were sort of making it, sort of rationalizing it away as well. So what were we to do? We found disparities, technology rich but curriculum poor, teachers isolated, needed more training. The pedagogy was boring. I didn't mention this, that in the school on the Hill, the programming class, which could have been a feeder to AP Computer Science, was really sort of by the book, visual basic, no assignments that were really engaging or relevant to kids, so kids found it boring. Belief systems, the pressure of high-stakes testing, computer classes as dumping grounds, it's vocational, and the insularity of AP Computer Science, which, by the way, is the only course in the schools that you get college admissions credit for. All of the other ones you don't get college admissions credit. So we found interest is there, courses are not. So we're researchers that don't believe in just having research sit on the shelf, but always want to know what is our action that we're going to take after we do the research. And while we had been doing this research, we developed a very close collaborative mind-thinking partnership with the Director of Science of LAUSD. And we sort of said, what do we do now with this situation? And he was really sort of blown away by our research because he also in the beginning had thought about computer science is computer literacy. And he didn't think about, well, yeah, what is this deeper thinking that we could be teaching our kids, that we should be thinking are the kids? And so he was a real ally. So with all of these problems, do we decide to walk away from the school? This is such a horribly big school system. It's bridled with bureaucracy. There's no funding. It's just a mess. Do we walk away? Do we start a summer camp for kids, which I think are wonderful things that happen? Do we start our own school? I think some of these high-tech high schools that have started are just fantastic, and they're models of what can be done with kids. And they teach us all about what can be done. So do we walk away, or do we stay where the kids of color are, where we stay where the majority of kids in the district are, and try to create systemic reform there? And that's what we decided to do. So this next slide is going to be very blurry. Apologies, but it didn't come out, so then we took it off the web right here a few minutes ago, and it just didn't work. But anyway, we formed the Computer Science Equity Alliance, which is an alliance between us researchers at UCLA, the K through 12 district. It's a higher ed K through 12 partnership with the mission to help build the capacity to expand access to college preparatory computer science learning opportunities and to broaden participation within the district. And this Computer Science Equity Alliance was headed up by the Director of Science of LAUSD and ourselves. So the first thing we did, you got to start somewhere. Okay, so out of the 57 high schools, only 11 of them offered AP Computer Science. So we said there's an equity issue here. If it's going to be up on the school on the hill, it needs to be in the other schools that with high numbers of kids of color. And we know that the kids are there. We know that they're interested, and we need to get those courses there. So we held a big principals meeting of all the principals from the district. We brought out the National Science Foundation to give a talk about what is computer science. And we asked the principals to identify a teacher in their school that could teach computer science, and we would train them at UCLA, a combination of us from education and people from computer science. We would give them professional development, and they would teach computer science. Well, what happened was we found gold, as we describe it. In many of these schools, in one of the schools, there was a graduate of Berkeley in computer science who was teaching math, who had wanted to teach computer science, but it was never a possibility. It wasn't on the curriculum. And so he was identified, and he's now become the lead teacher in LAUSD of computer science. He is fantastic. We found a programmer from India who had a long history of teaching computer science in India, who was an unbelievable teacher. And she taught in a school that was in Watts. So we found gold. We found these teachers. And what the principal had to agree to is that we would train them if they agreed that they would put AP Computer Science on the master's schedule. So we, in 1 year, doubled the number of AP Computer Science classes in the district. It went from 11 to 24. We more than doubled. And the numbers, the white bar is where we started in over 2 years' time. In the middle, you can see Latinos quadrupled. From 53 Latinos we're taking to 297. African Americans, it's on your left. It doubled, but that is dismal. There were 17 in the whole district. It went up to 33. Women on the far right went up, quadrupled. And so we just by putting the courses in there, the number of kids that were taking AP Computer Science made these tremendous advances. This was another bad picture, sorry, but we built a teachers community of teachers. They had never been in a community. They had never had professional development. They were isolated in their schools. We now brought them together to share with each other, to talk about how to build the enrollment in computer science, to find out what they needed, what we could provide for them. And we had something called AP Readiness, which is once a month. Teachers would bring their kids. We had about 80 kids 1 year from the schools to UCLA on Saturday mornings for 4 hours. These kids would get up at 5:30 in the morning, some of them, on a Saturday, would take a bus to come to UCLA. Some of them had never been to UCLA before, would come and get extra instruction in computer science at UCLA. And the teachers would learn from each other because the teachers would be UCLA faculty and also high school teachers that would teach, and then other teachers would learn from each other. Okay, so all that sounds great. Well, one step forward, two steps back. We're working in reality of public education. We lost teachers. This is Deepa Pai, the woman from India who was teaching in Watts. For the first year, she had 14 Latinas, 4 African American males in her class. The next year, she was an amazing teacher. The next year, she was pulled because the school needed a certified math teacher, and she was the only one that they could get. So they pulled her, and so that class could no longer happen. The teachers, while we were giving them professional development in the summer, you can't be up to snuff teaching computer science and AP computer science with just that. It was, most of them hung in there, they did really well, but some of them burnt out. And it's a struggle that we're addressing, and we're trying to figure out how to give the teachers the professional development that they need. The student scores were somewhat low. They were not high. That meant that the principal said, look at how can I justify this, and that's an argument we've been waging with the schools, and were determined to win it. And the other thing is that we were frustrated by the APCS curriculum, that it's very narrow, it's very teach to the test. It wasn't turning on enough kids to computer science. And I should have put on here, we had a break in funding. And so we could not, we're all based on getting funding. So we couldn't continue. Don't worry. Thank you. I got water. Okay. So what happened with this happening is that we took a break ourselves and we decided what we were going to do. And what we've done is we've created a new curriculum, a new course called Exploring Computer Science, exploring what computer science is and what it can do. And this is a pre-AP course. It's involved with human-computer interaction, problem-solving, web design, programming using Scratch, data modeling, robotics. Our goal is college admissions credit. In other words, we're trying to get a computer science course that will get college admissions credit, but we are making this course so engaging. Like, kids are going to be gathering statistics. They're working with UCLA, the Center for Embedded Network Sensing, that gathers earthquake data, activity, and so they're going to have this in the data modeling unit. They're going to have all this data about seismic activity and learning how you predict earthquakes, what the damages of earthquakes. We're doing it around pollution. We're doing a collaboration with the LA River Committee, which is to clean up the pollution in the LA River, so that kids are seeing that this computer science is really about their community, about their lives, and you can do really cool things with computer science. And so it's now being piloted in 6 schools in LAUSD. This is the funding from Microsoft helped us pay the teachers and come to the professional development on this. And our hope is to get it adopted by the whole district, and then it's going to be available for national distribution. So our model for creating this change is that, God, I don't know what happened to my throat. Excuse me. Our model for broadening participation is you need technical changes, which are the teachers, the courses, the computers, the tech assistants, everything you need in the schools. The normative changes are the belief systems. You need to convince the school system that these kids can do it and it's important for them to do it. And the political changes is that we're always battling, the testing pressures, the cutback in funding, that computer science is not an island unto itself, that everything that is happening with the pipeline in computer science is tied in with all of these other social issues. And that not only the interaction between access and belief systems, but it sits within a context, a whole context of what's happening in education. So before I conclude, I want to talk about the book and the title of the book, Stuck in the Metaphor, because stuck in the shallow end, because this became a metaphor, and I'm going to tell you about it. It became a metaphor that runs through all of our work. And what it was is this. It comes from the world of swimming, hence Stuck in the Shallow End. While we were doing this research, I read an article that talked about that African American kids drown 3 times more than white kids. And I became, I would say, obsessed with this in trying to understand this. And I went to the Center for Disease Control study that issued this report about the drowning rates, and it also talked about greater fear of swimming within the African American community and how it gets handed down generation to generation, and how about 60% of African American kids between 6 and 14 don't know how to swim. And I was profoundly shook by this and wanted to understand more about it. So I did a lot of study and research on it, and it turns out that it goes back to Jim Crow, and there's the whole history of Jim Crow. So here's a picture from that period. Swimming pools were very contested sites, and incredible white, violent opposition to people of color going into public swimming pools. pools in Mississippi were buried rather than have them be integrated. And there were violent eruptions all over the country about swimming. And it was not just African Americans, it was all kids of color, all people of color. This is from a children's book about a Japanese American who went on to become a diver, members only except Wednesday. Now what that is about is in California, all people of color, Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans, could not swim in the swimming pools except for one night a week, and that was the night before the swimming pool was drained and cleaned. And that was the only time that they could swim. So there's a whole story. His name is Sammy Lee, and a coach saw him swimming in the pool, took him under his wing, and Sammy Lee learned to dive by diving into a sand pit in the coach's backyard. But this was happening to all people of color. There's a whole history of the swimming pools and also the beaches in Los Angeles. This went up to the civil rights movement. This is a picture from Harlem in which there was social unrest right before the civil rights legislation. There were no swimming pools, hot summer. So they brought in these flatbed trucks filled with water so the kids could swim and cool off. Well, you know, these flatbed trucks were 3 feet deep of water. No one can learn how to swim in 3 feet deep water. And throughout the inner cities all over the country prior to the civil rights movement, there were these mini pools that were constructed. Literally, they were these concrete square blocks filled with water that were not enough to, you could not learn how to swim. Or there were these sprinkler parks where, you know, there were just sprinklers and water, so you're not learning how to swim. And this is a whole question of denied access. How do you learn to swim if you're denied access? And that it's a very contested, violent history, which leads to fear. And if you don't learn to swim, then mothers are not going to want their kids swimming in unsafe rivers, you know, with the only option. And so there's a whole history of fear associated with swimming. Now, then there's civil rights legislation, but you know, it's also true today. This is a picture of Beverly Hills with one in 3 households has swimming pools, and Boyle Heights, which is a large Latino area, which is 1 pool for every 10,000 households. So even today, the access around swimming is you know, the disparities are incredible. So the question is, you know, swimming is predominantly a white sport. And this is a picture from, if you followed the Olympics, Cullen Jones this year was the only African American on the Olympic team of 44 swimmers. And the first African American Olympiad and swimmer was not until 2000. So this is, you know, why? And why, and it goes against all intuition, you know, the belief that African Americans are good athletes and have physical prowess. But what happens within swimming? You know, what happens to that stereotype then? What happens there? And there's been a false academic studies and myth that went on for years that the reasons why African Americans were not swimming was because they were less buoyant and they had thicker bone structure. And so the coaches who will get interviewed will talk about that they have to cut against this myth of blacks as sinkers. But these are, in every case of segregation, there are myths that rationalize and justify the segregation. And this was the case of swimming and the history of swimming. So Cullen Jones has taken on this myth. And there's a new Make a Splash campaign that's run by USA Swimming in which they are determined to get kids of color to learn how to swim. And he talks about how when he goes to different groupings of kids and they say, okay, who likes to swim? You know, everybody's hands, you know, raise up. And then he goes, okay, how many of you, you know, can dive off into the deep end? And the hands don't go up. How many of you can swim in the deep end? The hands stay down. And he says to them, he said, you know, if you're going to call yourself a swimmer, you have to be able to go into the deep end, and you don't want to be stuck in the shallow end. And so that's kind of the metaphor that, you know, tied our work together, which is what we're looking at is we don't want, you know, kids of color stuck in the shallow end of technology and computing, and that we're trying to, you know, do of our work, we have to look at the access issues and the structure issues and the belief systems and the whole social context of sort of the attack on public education that's going on to understand our original research question about the race gap that is true in your field in computer science. So that's my presentation, and I would love to entertain any questions or any remarks that you have about the presentation. Yeah.
My name is Carlson. I started a program 10 years ago in a rural high school because I saw the same trends that were happening. It wasn't so much something that was racially divided. It was simply a challenge of rural environment, and the fact that where I grew up there was fishing, logging, and farming. None of those industries exist anymore for those students, so what do they do?
Yeah.
But the challenge is we took and put a Windows NT certification course in a rural high school. And as a result, we had incredible enrollment in the class. It was something that was well attended. We had, you know, students that became parents in the class, end up getting a job out, you know, out of high school at $39,000 a year because of these certifications. But with No Child Left Behind, all the funding was cut. The teachers were hired away because we trained them. I was in charge of a training program here at Microsoft, so I just included them in the program. I had extra seats in the back of the room. It was easy to do. And except that now with all this training, the educator said, listen, I'm working too hard for what I know, for the money I'm making. And so the district hired them away as the district administrator. And so we see things, you know, we see these patterns. I think there's two levels here. First is the level of just fundamental problems in the education system with educators not, you know, educators that are not adequately trained for computer science. The school district doesn't have the infrastructure to support all of these computers. The students know more than the teachers do in many cases about how the computers work in general. And then the rationalization of these type of behaviors are that the good teachers can't stand, they're so frustrated, they can't stand to go to school. They can't tolerate being in the environment unless they do rationalize some way, because otherwise you get so frustrated you couldn't stand to be there. And the story about going to the community colleges, so as these programs were shut down because of No Child Left Behind, the teachers had to get pulled back into classes that were, in this state, going to the WASL, the Washington Student Achievement Award. The students then went to community colleges, and these are the leading students. These are the lighthouse students in the school district. So now the high school is left with the lighthouse students that light the way, that lead in achievement and show the vision of what can be possible, have now left to the community colleges. So the school district now doesn't have the money associated with the head count of that student, because the Running Start programs take the money to the community colleges, and we're in this race to the bottom spiral in our education system. So there's a fundamental flaw in our education system that's exacerbated when we get into situations of color and females in that space. And so I see it's collapsing into itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And I mean, my only hope, to tell you the truth, is the national election. You know, I have some hope that things are going to change, and because they have to change. And I think that you identified the whole problem with the teachers is really critical. You know, they're not paid enough, they're not given professional development enough, and how do we expect to have a stronger pipeline and, you know, technology educated kids?
When you train them, they work more, right? So now then there's no compensation in the educational program to pay them $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year of what they're really worth that they can get outside.
I absolutely agree. Behind you.
Because I'm from a rural, underprivileged area, which was mining, logging, and fishing. And I've worked quite a bit, Butte, Montana. I've worked a lot with Montana Tech, one CS faculty person who was trying to do professional development for teachers, and he was using Scratch, and he created some great classes for middle school. He now has colon cancer. So, you know, my question for you, I think it's fabulous that you're developing curriculum that is away from the APCS, because that is privileged and insular in itself. I mean, that is not what's going to broaden the horizons and expose more kids. But it's so funny because, you know, I've been working in this field for a long time, and there's all these wonderful programs, but somehow we haven't been able to scale them. I mean, it's funding, it's everything. And are you working with CSTA, the ACM?
Yeah, okay. So let me explain that. Absolutely. So the whole question of sustainability. What will make this not be just a drop in the bucket in one little district? Okay. So this new course, what we're trying to do is get it college credit. And we're piloting it, and then we're going to expand the number of courses. And then we are going to make it available for national distribution. And we're being supported by the National Science Foundation, by the Computer Science Teachers Association, so that we're hoping to get it. The National Science Foundation has been really awoken to this problem of K through 12 education and the question of broadening the participation in computing. And so they are really putting a lot of focus on this right now. And there's a plan, hopefully down the pike, that we would hold together a national conference of district leaders from every major city around the country, talk about sort of what we found and figure out what can be done on a national scale. So there needs to be a sequence of courses in the school, and there would need to be massive, I mean, it would be almost like a VISTA program, a Peace Corps program on that scale of training of teachers and getting teachers in the school that are able to teach computer science in a way, and convincing the schools that computer science has academic worth, that it's not just a tech art, but that it's rich in academic content. Yes?
Okay. I grew up in the South, grew up in Virginia. Technology for African Americans was, like you said, tough to get, but you know, it was still made it go. My question is, because computers, literacy, or whatever you want to call it, is the foundation now of being able to get into school in engineering. Well, I have a degree in chemistry, all things.
In chemistry?
Chemistry, yes. All right, so being able to get into engineering, or the sciences like chemistry, and all those things that, like Virginia Tech, or Georgia Tech, or Cal Poly, or whatever, my fear is that people of color are going to get left farther behind, because computers are basic tools to be able to do those things starting on a college level at undergrad. Freshman year.
Right.
First thing you have to buy is a PC to sit in your room to do this. And if in the high schools, like what you're saying, if they're not even getting real courses in understanding how a computer works, oh my goodness, we got bigger problems than just computer science. It's
Right.
just everything that's technology.
You know, I think that there's so many levels to this. One is that I think that looking at computer science is an indicator of the quality of education the kids are getting in these schools. In math also, I mean, in all across the board. And in these other subjects like math or whatever, because they are being tested and they are part of the academic canon, they are a step up, a big step up from computer science. But they are also poor. And I think, right.
When you're saying get tested in math, you're looking at basic math.
Yeah, but I think that why computer science is so important is that it's a door opener. Like the head of Pixar Animation is a computer scientist to do genetics, you know. You can probably get into schools of engineering and all of that with a math background or physics or whatever. It doesn't have to be computer science.
I understand that,
But
the basic tool
yes,
is working on the computer.
absolutely, absolutely. So that basic tool, the basic familiarity is really critical, but also the richness of the problem solving and algorithmic thinking is really important.
I attune it to kids now, let's say they wanted to go into chemistry.
Yeah.
Okay? That's saying they're going to chemistry without really the math background, and you're lost.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
It's the same thing.
Absolutely. And so it's kids that have, kids are so engaged with the technology. This is kind of what it's like. They're so engaged with it. They're so into it. Let's take advantage of that and up the level of knowledge and up the level of thinking that's going on, because that level of thinking and knowledge is going to get them into many different fields.
Are you interested in Xbox? Yes, you get a whole bunch of kids in there. How would you like to design a game in Xbox?
Right,
Oh.
exactly.
Right.
Exactly, exactly. You had your hand up, yeah.
Yes, I just have a couple of comments to make. And the first one is when you spoke about the core pedagogical skills or content knowledge in the schools. And I read a couple of years ago, Haberman wrote a beautiful article about that. And I think that is one of the key things with
Yes.
in these, especially these poorer schools, is the pedagogy, because the teachers, while they believe in teaching a certain way, many of the times it is not borne out in the classrooms. And I believe that has to do with professional development that is being done too. Because for computer science, you might have a company comes in and professional development is done through the summer. There is no continuing professional development. So it's a one shot and
That's
they're
right.
gone.
That's
so the
right.
teachers get the tools.
Yeah.
There's no continuation, because they may get a computer, they may get that initial training, but there's no further support for
Absolutely.
the teachers. The next thing
Which
I
we're trying
wanted
to address. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
The next thing I wanted to touch on was you did the belief system, because that is also critical. You find that in many schools, if the principal doesn't believe that computer science is important or any of those courses are not important, they're not going to be taught. There's not going to be enough focus on those classes. So unless you get the principals to buy in and the teachers to buy into that belief system that these courses are important, it's not going to be getting enough attention.
And they have to believe that their kids in their schools are capable of it.
Yes.
Yes.
So it's, two-pronged.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, over here and then in the back, yeah. Yeah, Linda, okay.
Oh, okay. So, going back to the Computer Science Teachers Association, is that what it is? I don't know if you would know this, but is NSF, because you, like what you were saying, your course is sort of the culmination, and ideally fifth graders would start learning about problem solving and thinking. Is NSF funding the preparatory courses to get everyone ready for the higher level course that you're working on? Are there efforts?
There's a lot of efforts going on right now. By the way, does anyone have a cough drop or anything? I've really got this tickle in my throat. Okay, there's a lot of efforts going on now to fund K-12, looking at STEM, science, technology. What is it? STEM, science, technology,
engineering, mathematics, and technology.
Yeah. And there's a whole program devoted to K through 12. So they are doing it.
26 to 1 is involved. Project 26
Yeah.
to 1.
Yeah. But there's been these projects around for a long time, and I'm just feeling it's going to, that's okay. All right.
Yeah, I'm in the kitchen.
I'm just beginning to feel that it's going to take, it's going to take more. I mean, I don't mean to, talk about Obama here, but I really think this is a political thing. I think it's going to have to come from the White House, and it's going to, and I have faith, I have hope that it really may happen. It is going to have to be like setting up the Peace Corps. That massive of an undertaking to get this problem. And I'm tired of dicking around with these little programs. that flash in a pan, and I think that industry like Microsoft is going to really have to belly up, and Google's going to have to belly up, and people are going to have, these corporations and everyone are going to have to really step up to the plate. And it's going to have to be that big, because otherwise it's ridiculous. We're spending our whole lives beating our heads up against the wall? Yeah, and then Carla.
Have you ever looked at data from students from private high schools? Because for me, it's like I'm from a country where it's basically just public education. There are very few private institutions. And what I see here, that public schools are, I think, fairly bad. My son is attending a public school. And then in private schools, it's completely different. And the entire,
Yes.
like, the courses that are offered completely different.
Right.
So I just wonder, it's like, yeah, the data you present is, I think, is very relevant data, not just for computer science, but the overall state of
Absolutely.
public
Absolutely.
school system here.
Oh, it breaks your heart if you go into a private school and see what they are learning compared to what...
But you have the teachers also
Yeah,
in
yeah,
comparison
yeah.
to that.
Did you consider in your research some of the social issues behind why there are so few Latinos and African Americans in some of the higher technology classes?
Okay,
Especially
so-
at the school on the hill.
Okay, so bring up what...
For instance, well, to be a self-proclaimed techie in an African American
Okay, thank you.
environment can be detrimental to your health.
to be a geek can make you look... Yeah, okay, so we did. And thank you very much.
But isn't that universal across all races?
Well, I think... Well, that's a good question.
There is some of that across the board.
Okay, we did it, in one of the chapters of the book goes into that, because we did a lot of interviews with kids. And I think that the geek thing is getting reduced a little bit, because it's also really cool to know stuff on computers and music and all of this stuff. So I think you can be like an athlete and a geek. I mean, an athlete and be good at computers at the same time. But geek is very much identified with, the white skinny kid in the...
There was
There's stripes.
a gentleman's name at Florida State who last week became a Rhodes Scholar. He's a defensive back for the Florida State football team. Oh my God, they made a big deal about that on ESPN, which was great.
Yeah.
Won.
But what is really important, that's talked about a lot in one of the chapters in the book, is the loneliness of, like, interviewed the one African American woman in the AP computer science class, and the loneliness for her and the pain it was for her. Yeah. Yes.
If you're African American here or Latino, you felt being the only one.
Right.
Going to school at Virginia Tech, we made up 0.4% of the university. Felt it everywhere. So
Right.
You get used to that.
Right.
You have to deal with it.
Right. Well, that's what, yes, but it shouldn't be, and that's why there's this thing called the posse effect, which is trying to get teachers to recruit a posse of kids. Like when we were working on the gender stuff, if you don't want just one girl, well, if that girl's on the swim team, get her to, invite her swim team, get kids to invite their friends so they're not alone and taking this course, because it shouldn't be so it is, and it cannot be that way. So teachers have to be proactive. But we did a lot of interviews with this one girl, and for a lot of the kids, they were talking about how we kind of choose our classes where our friends are. All high school kids do that, They choose their kids where their friends are, and if only the white guys are in the AP computers, you make all those decisions of where you choose your classes, and it's hard to break through, and the only way it's going to be broken through is if the teachers are really hip to it and really active about breaking that divide that's going on and getting kids to come in with their friends. And but the social issues, when we interviewed, there were kids that said, we have the quotes in the book, it's the families that have the money that send their kids to computer camp, that have all the computers, Then there was the kids saying, well, it's the white and Asian kids, it's the really smart kids that are in computer science. It's not that we're smart, but everyone thinks the white and Asian kids are smarter. And so the teachers talked to them about computer science. So there was not one consistent thing that popped out in terms of the social issues, but all of these things really do play a role.
Understood.
Yeah, and especially the being the sole one.
Only one or two.
That's the biggest. And then the fear of, you know, you don't want to live up to the stereotype, and so you have to be doubly good, doubly good. Yeah, Carla?
So is there anything that Microsoft employees with technical skills can do besides give money? I mean, will schools let a person come volunteer, say, at a computer science class?
You have to get fingerprinted and...
But if you call that...
Well, different school districts are different, but I think it would be unbelievable if there was kind of like a Vista Corps of Microsoft employees that and help with professional development. I mean, it's like a no-brainer what needs to be done, but it has to come from the top, and it has yeah.
Can I address that
Yeah.
for Washington State? Because I just got an email yesterday that I sent to all my friends who I know are parents in public school. There's a joint task force looking at the education, public education in Washington State. They're coming out with their recommendations like tomorrow or next week. And what happened is there's no technology recommendations. I mean, they are asking for increased funding. And so this email that I got is from fundourfuturewashington.org. I got involved because it was trying to fund school librarians, which almost got cut. So there's a line item for school librarians, there's a line item for technology in general, but there's no technology standards, information literacy, and I agree, it has to come at the political level. Washington State, California, everybody has to say, these are the minimally acceptable standards for every student coming out of our classes. And then you have a class action lawsuit if there's discrimination by race or district or rural versus urban. But so one thing we can do is act at the political level. You know, every parent, and non-parent too, should be calling your legislator or the people on the joint task force, which is interesting because it's Ross Hunter, Fred Jarrett. Sorry, I was trying to scroll through this email to see. But those are the East Side representatives, and they're two of the people on there. And Ross is former Microsoft.
They just had a meeting at a high school here
Yes.
talking
Yeah.
about what exactly is a basic education. And I think where the community comes in is that when you define a basic education, that is what the state is going to fund.
Right.
So if technology is regarded as part of that
Right.
basic education, it's not going to be funded.
Well, exactly. And that's why as Microsoft parents, we have to say, our kids won't be capable of working here, if, you know, and other technology companies unless you include this.
Or Fred Hutch, or,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
If you let me comment, couple things we learned. When we did the thing 10 years ago, there's the first class of 30, 2 of those students are actually employees at Microsoft right now, out of that school. Frank Gonzalez and Chris Snyder, both from Arlington High School where we started this program. So there are interesting results. But the challenge is, one, the classes you create have to be approved by the state superintendent of public instruction so that they're credible. So that's the other thing you have to go through, is whenever you create these things, you have to go through all of the political factors. The second thing, we created parallel groups. I shared this with the Microsoft system engineers, which are worldwide. And they created satellite programs. But we learned some interesting things. There's a liability factor that is important with the educational systems, because even though we're very technically trained and technical experts, we're not teachers. And so there always has to be a teacher in the classroom from an aspect of liability, so that for some reason somebody doesn't consider that when we put a challenging question out, somebody felt offended that somebody put them on the spot, and it became a question. Now, there happened to be a teacher in the room, but there's a lot of delicate things that need to be understood, and there should be some allowances given for people wanting to do public industry partnerships with public education.
Yeah.
That, you know, just like if you go a question writing, you fall off the horse, you don't get sued. To some extent, if people are going to come out of industry and willing to volunteer their time to bolster the school districts, that there is some provision for them to say, listen, I'm not a teacher, but I am the expert in this area, and I can provide some savings. So I think there's a need for public-private partnerships in the sense of of working with them. I think there's some lessons learned that we need to work with. But the other thing I can say is within all of Microsoft, there's a bunch of engineers worldwide that are willing to volunteer, provided that there's adequate challenges and guidance given of how to engage, limiting liability of people who are willing to volunteer, and then kind of the best practices that go on with what we did. The other thing we had to do, by the way, was break our curriculum down into 45-minute sections that actually worked with class periods, because our curriculum was done on 8-hour days and 10-hour days. So we have to break, we just took Microsoft Technical Education and we broke them into 45-minute segments, and then we also spiced it up, which made it compelling for the students to actually do it, made it fun for the teacher as well.
I just want to say that we have the room till 3, and I want to make sure maybe there's one or two more questions, and then give you time to get your book signed by Jane, and then I know she's doing a public talk at Elliott Bay at 6. We want to scooter back across the water.
Is that a hand up?
Yeah.
You got the light in your eyes there. So this is related to one of your points, but I'm wondering about how far down the grade scale does this really today take effect, and what are the appropriate levels at which some of the computer science topics can be introduced and really taken up by kids?
There's this program that you should look at on the web called CS Unplugged. And they teach this guy named Tim Bell. He's from Australia, but he's been traveling all around the country. And he teaches, what?
New Zealand.
New Zealand. And he teaches computer science without computers to young kids. And he's got the whole program on the web. So young kids, I'm saying 4th grade, 5th grade. And
to some degree it seems as if this plays into some of the testing requirements.
Yes.
And some of the expectations that we as parents and participatory educators want to bring to this conversation.
Yeah.
So it would be interesting to find Tim's perspective.
Yeah, yeah. So it's called CS.
For their kids, man. It's just pure and simple.
What?
Technology people want more for their kids than they're getting. Flat out. And it's frustrating as hell.
Well, but everyone wants opportunities.
Yes.
I mean, it's not,
I know, but as far as from the technology point of view.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thrilled that you all came and got to hear about Jane.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you for
Jane,
listening.
is there a way people can get in touch with you directly? Do you want to put out your email, your campus email or something like that?
Sure.
Because you might have ongoing questions. And
Well, first of all, there's the book if you're interested, and it's margolis@ucla.edu, and you'll remember it.
I think it's actually in the book too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, but
So great. If you have books, if you
thank you very much.
Have any other questions? Thank you so much, Jane, for coming.
Okay,
Thanks, everybody.
and thank you.
Thanks, Carla. Really.